Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Rouxbe live event. My name is Chef Ken Rubin. I'm the Chief Culinary Officer at the Rouxbe Online Culinary School. Today we have open office hours. So many of you have probably already joined these office hours at some other time, but these are open office hours where you can bring any question related to food and cooking, in particular around our courses, to me. So we try to keep it, really focused on food and cooking skills. We'll use this opportunity to answer your question live on air. But of course, if you have a deeper question or more personal question or more that's individual to you, we might ask that you contact us directly just to help you offline. So if you're new to this platform, it's a very simple platform to use. What we're doing here is basically, you have the ability to type in a question and then have that moderated and then responded to. So to the top right box where you see me speaking in the video, there's a place to add a question. You click the black add button, and that goes into a queue for us to have a quick look at. When you see a question that you like, there on the right-hand side, you can give it a little press on that heart button. That will bump it up so we get to it just a little bit faster. So this is Anything Goes office hours. We're really, really appreciative of all the different courses who are joining. So we have with us our professional cook course, our plant-based professional, forks over knives, lots of other students from our courses, both plant-based and non-plant-based courses joining us today. So we'll be fielding all those questions. So I'm going to just go ahead and jump right into the questions. The first question today is from Farida, and she is asking, do nuts and seeds need to always be refrigerated? I would say always might be a little bit strong, but I would say if you have the ability to keep nuts and seeds in cold or cool storage, that will certainly extend the shelf life. Nuts and seeds are made up of oils that can become volatile and can degrade over time and become a little bit rancid. So when you have the ability to keep nuts and seeds refrigerated or frozen or even just cooler than room temperature, that can oftentimes extend the shelf life. The issue is that a lot of people are just already pretty limited on the refrigeration space. So it's not the top priority, of course, of things that you want to refrigerate, compared to produce or things like that, but certainly should be very high on your list. So hopefully that helps you there. Carol has a question about beans here. So she asks, when trying to mitigate the gas effects of beans, does adding apple cider to the water in the soaking overnight help? Is it necessary to soak beans when cooking them in a pressure cooker? Or does cooking them in garlic eliminate the need to soak? So great questions, Carol. This is obviously a big topic of conversation amongst the whole food plant-based crowd. The effects of beans and legumes in terms of gas. I would say that a number of things will work, and it really depends on the person. But some of the things that you referenced, the soaking and things like that, I think certainly can help, just in terms of the extraction of some of those sugars, which might not be as easily digested. So I think soaking can definitely help. I would say another thing is just really understanding that each bean is going to be slightly different. So the sugar and the starch components of those beans, while similar, if you compare lentils to black beans to kidney beans, you're going to be kind of in different places just according to their composition and how their skin is composed and things like this. But I would say certainly soaking, proper cooking are going to be really, really important. There are certain things you can add, I think, to reduce potentially the effects of the gas. I think, things like in traditional, in Japanese cooking, things like kombu, in Mexican cooking, things like epazote, all those things are going to maybe help a little bit. But really the biggest thing around beans is just eating enough beans so you get used to it. Your body will naturally develop the digestive power to metabolize and process those various starches and sugars. So that's probably the biggest thing. The other thing is staying hydrated. So just having enough water in your body to also process is going to be very, very important. Next question here from Corey. Corey asks, how do I pack more flavor into these vegan dishes? My family is not sold on this lifestyle yet. So Corey, I would say the number one thing, to help ensure that people will be excited about whole food plant-based food is that it tastes really good. It's got to look good. It's got to taste good. It's got to be interesting for your family to approach. And it's got to be something where, the story that your family tells when it becomes dinner time is not, oh gosh, what's going to happen? What are mom and dad going to make that we're not going to like? And flip it to what's going to be exciting or new or different, or what are those favorites that you don't even miss the meat. So those are kind of important high-level things to kind of think about. When it comes to specifics about flavor, I would say that the best things you can do is really identify within any particular dish, what are those things that are contributing flavor? In some cases, it might be aromatics like onions or leeks or shallots or garlic. It could be the spices being used, a spice blend. It could be fresh herbs. It could be other sorts of things that are giving the strong flavor components of that dish. So in addition to, I would say, starting with really good ingredients that taste good on their own, fresh, broccoli, fresh vegetables, fresh foods that are going to have just the natural flavor, starting with that, and then adding those elements that are going to be really, really full of flavor. So if you identify within the dish those things that add flavor, you might want to bump those up. That's one way. The other thing around flavor development in whole food plant-based cooking is about technique, cooking technique. And I would say for people who are looking to have a deeper, richer, more interesting type flavor, more dynamic flavor, applying combination cooking without oil or dry heat cooking methods will be a way to increase the overall depth of flavor. So by this, I mean roasting, dry sautéing, broiling, grilling, things like this, where you're adding, direct dry heat to that product. It's going to cause the charring and the crisping and the color and some smokiness and some texture and some other things that a lot of people really like and really miss. So I would say those are important things. Corey, the other piece I'll just mention in terms of flavor is really, and this takes some time and some trial and error, but really understanding flavor balancing. So as you're cooking, taste the food, put it into your mouth during the cooking process, even before you know it's done. But you want to see how those flavors are developing and maturing and changing. And think about what you can do during the course of the cooking to bump the flavor, to increase the appeal of that dish. In some cases, it's finishing with more fresh herbs, or finishing with a little bit of acid, some lemon juice or some vinegar. So it's all those little things that you kind of say, well, what does this need right now? And as you cook more, you'll become better at determining those things. Jay asked a question here. After I cook pasta, I drain it and then return it to the pot to keep warm. I'm finding the pasta sticking together, or to the pan. What's the best way to prevent sticking without using oil? So Jay, one thing that people do is that when you drain the pasta, actually keep some of that water. So maintain just a container, maybe a cup or 2 cups of that pasta water. And the best thing to do is to basically cook your pasta al dente, drain it, and then if you want to add some of that water back in, that will keep it just, moist enough so it doesn't stick together. It kind of sticks together when the exterior becomes so dry and those starches begin to want to stick together because there's nothing kind of separating them. So if you're not going to use any oil, some of the liquid used for cooking would be perfectly fine. And I would just say, again, keep a cup or 2 of that, add it in, give it a stir. The other thing about pasta is you want to make sure you serve it fairly quickly after you do that step, because it will continue to swell and absorb water. It's not going to just sit there forever and maintain its texture. So if it's not something you want to use immediately, I would say it's best to just kind of, let it cook al dente. Drain it out. If you want to add some water back into it just to kind of keep it more moving, that'd be a better step. Next question coming here from Carol. How do you decide to dry saute onions, garlic versus wet saute by adding water a little bit at a time? When you think of caramelizing onions, what type of dishes call for that type of treatment versus a wet saute? So Carol, you're bringing up kind of two different distinctions here. These are both using the terminology of saute, one with some liquid and one without some liquid. No oil involved in either one in this context in terms of forks over knives or whole food plant-based style of cooking. So when you're dry sauteing, I would say the thing you're going for in those contexts are going to be the development of color. You're caramelizing, you're bringing out the sugars from those onions, from those foods, and those sugars are going to be extracted. They're going to stick to the pan. You're going to release those from the pan. It's going to create color. It's going to create a depth of flavor that you're not going to get if you have moisture in the pan at all times. And the real difference is, in the pan, if you have direct heat, say touching the end of an onion, that's going to provide a much different upper temperature threshold than if that pan has liquid in it. Because if the pan has liquid in it, all you're doing is steaming or simmering, and you're never going to really exceed that 212 degree Fahrenheit type temperature threshold. So really what you want to do is decide, do I want those flavors? Do I want the flavors from caramelization, from the browning effect? And if the answer is yes, then you want to apply a dry saute first before you add the water, because once you add the water, it makes it very, very difficult to dry out to then caramelize. So start by caramelizing and then add water to finish cooking, or some other liquid to finish cooking. When it comes to what kind of dishes do you want to add caramelization or those flavors, that's up to you. People find that caramelization adds a sweetness, a nuttiness, a depth, a range of flavors. So I think for you, it's just a matter of saying, do I want those extra flavors or not? Are they going to enhance the dish, or are they going to detract from the flavors of the dish? I typically start my week by caramelizing just a huge amount of onions. I might caramelize 10 or 12 onions to start a week, because I'm going to use those caramelized onions in a few different things throughout the week. I'm going to add it to black beans to make burritos. I'm going to add it into puree it with cashews to make a cream sauce. I'm going to add it to other dishes, right? Because I'm going to really appreciate the depth and the sweetness and the complexity that the caramelization would start. So I just think it's a good thing to have on hand. It's a great way to boost flavor. People always talk about adding flavor. Caramelizing vegetables, whether it's onions or other vegetables, is a great way to boost the flavor. Anne has a question. She says, I'm almost finished with this cooking course and want to find a few things like dinners or a pressure cooker or no tuna sandwich. Do you have a search bar so I don't have to go through all 182 lessons one by one? So Anne, 182 tasks, you can see the entire list of tasks at your course home view. And the other thing to do is, if you go to your course dashboard, that has a few different icons. One looks like a little recipe box. If you click on that recipe box right under where it says your online cooking school in your dashboard page, that's the page that says dashboard, that has your picture at the left hand side. That page actually opens up a link which is almost like a quick view inside the course. There's two links inside there. One is for recipes. So if you want to find that tunaless tuna salad, you can find it very quickly kind of in that gallery page. Or it also has a listing by lessons. The other thing to do is just look at that syllabus page, that course homepage gives you the overview without having to go through each individual task, kind of clicking by clicking. So hopefully that helps you. James says, would you please comment on the use of liquid smoke and the possible carcinogens it might contain? Is there a safe substitute? Yeah, so James, anytime you're smoking something or using even liquid smoke, there will be some carcinogens that are the result of the combustion that happened with that wood to create that smoke. So absolutely, there are some carcinogens associated with that. I think the good news is that it takes just a very, very small amount of those products to have a large flavor impact. Or you could just, naturally smoke something, whether it's over wood or on a grill. If those are not interesting to you, or you don't want to do those things, I would just say stay away from it altogether, and find other products that might add some of that smoky quality, whether it's smoked paprika or smoked black pepper or some of those types of products. Barbara says, hello, Ken. Thank you for what you do. Thank you, Barbara. What should I look for when buying dried legumes, especially black beans? Great question. So, typically when you're buying beans or legumes, the very first thing you want to look for are going to be a good source, a reputable supplier, as we say. So a source where you're going to be getting beans where the origin is verified, where you're going to be confident that it's from this season. That's a big thing in buying beans, is you don't want to buy beans from the 2018 or 2019 season. You want to have the most recent beans that are available to you, which would be a fresher dried bean. But really what you want to do is find beans that are going to kind of work for your style of cooking. So there's, even within the category of black beans, lots of different brands, lots of different producers, lots of different sizes. I really like, the beans that I've been buying are coming directly from a farm, and they tend to be, as a bean, a little bit smaller than some of the ones you see in the market. So the black beans are just maybe 10 or 20% smaller. They cook very, very quickly. They have just a delicious flavor. But really what you want to do is, again, find a good source, make sure they're from the current season, and try them. I would say just cook them and see what the flavor is like for you. If you do a side-by-side tasting of different black beans, you'll notice that they're actually can be quite different, which is pretty interesting. Jacqueline asks, since I'm very new to Forks Over Knives and to Rouxbe, is there any other memberships or courses that you would suggest in order to stay connected with a whole food plant-based lifestyle? Great question, Jacqueline. I would say that, the Forks Over Knives community is just an amazing community. They've got lots of resources, via social media, via their app, via cookbooks, lots of other things. So Forks Over Knives, I think, in itself has a huge community of people that you can connect with and learn from. Rouxbe has some other courses that, deal with plant-based. I wouldn't say they're all whole food plant-based. Some of our courses are just more broadly plant-based. For instance, our plant-based professional course and our essential vegan dessert course. But, aside from those, I would say there's so many organizations out there that are doing great work connecting people. It really almost depends in some ways, Jacqueline, on your goals. If you're looking for more health-oriented type outcomes or lifestyle, or meeting people like you or other people with families, whatever it might be. So, a lot of it just depends on specifically what you're looking for. Natasha says, hello, Chef Ken. How can we preserve fresh mushrooms to stay fresh longer in the fridge? Great question. So I'm a huge fan of mushrooms, and here in Oregon, where I live, we'll sometimes forage mushrooms and go out to the woods, up into the mountains or the Coast Range, and find some mushrooms. And it's always a big question about what you do. How do you preserve them? How do you extend the life of those mushrooms? So I would say the first thing is there's going to be certain mushrooms that just do really well in the fresh form. And unless you can find a way to dehydrate them or dry them or pickle them, perhaps, you're going to really want to find them or find a way to use them in their most fresh form. If you're looking at ways of just maintaining the integrity of fresh mushrooms in your refrigerator, the most important thing is that they are not too wet and that you have a lot of airflow, but that they're also not exposed to the fan so that the surface might dry out. So really, it's a little bit of a game where you're trying to preserve moisture interiorly, but also letting them really breathe and have lots of airflow. So this could be just a system where you have some paper towels or some towels, or even just very, very loosely in bins with a kind of a loose fitting lid. What you don't want to have happen is you don't want water to accumulate and for those mushrooms to get waterlogged or slimy in any way. That's what you don't want. Ultimately, Natasha, I think one of the best things about mushrooms is just to preserve them. So I've seen amazing mushroom preservation, again, with pickling, with doing fermented mushrooms, which is amazing. It's very, very delicious. Or various techniques for air drying mushrooms. One technique that I've always seen is where you take kind of a needle and thread and just thread the mushrooms and create these long, kind of thin strings of mushrooms where each mushroom is separated out, and those get hung, and that's a great way for them to air dry. So kind of a neat thing. They come off the string, and then you can store them once they're dry. Next question. Hello, Ken. I'd like to ask, what would be suitable material for wrapping the foods when reheating with steam? I am reluctant to use aluminum foil. What about baking paper or perhaps cotton napkins? So I would say the very best thing if you're looking to reheat with steam and you don't want to use any sort of foil would be parchment paper. Parchment paper is a very easy to find, inexpensive paper used for culinary applications. And I would say that's probably your best bet, is using some kind of a parchment paper wrapping, just making sure that you have enough coverage on it so that you really maintain the steam. You could use something like a cloth napkin or a cotton napkin, but the only thing with that is it's not going to do a great job of keeping the steam in. It's more porous, whereas the parchment paper or something similar would do a better job of maintaining the steam inside that container. Next question from Tracy and Adrian. When looking at recipes in the class, many of them call for oil. Isn't FOK against oil? Yes, the FOK philosophy does not include added oils in recipes. So Tracy and Adrian, if you want to give us an email and point those out, all of our recipes in our course have been approved by them, but I'm just curious to see specifically what you're looking at or referring to there. So if you could, Tracy and Adrian, just give us a quick email directly to us. We'll have a look for you. Next question. I live in Florida where it's hot and humid. Where is the best place for me to store garlic, onions, and potatoes? I would say in general, kind of the rule of thumb is you want to store it in a cool, dark place without a lot of excess humidity or moisture. So, if you have a place in your home where it's not refrigerated, but extra cool, maybe with some airflow, that would be great. In some parts of the country, if you have a basement or a place that's just naturally cooler, that would be a good option. But really, for a lot of people, if you're living under air conditioning in Florida, you just want to make sure it's out of the sunlight and in a cool place, a cool part of your kitchen. So I can't really tell you exactly where that is. Everyone's setup is just a little bit different. Sometimes it's in a darker place, maybe behind something, or in the pantry area where you keep some of your dry goods and things like that. But a lot of that just depends on what kind of airflow you have in that space. Next question here. How do you prepare and cook garlic scapes? Thank you for all you do, Chef Ken. You and the team are amazing. Oh gosh, I am always thinking how fortunate we are here to have such an awesome team. So thank you. It takes a lot of us to make this magic happen. So thank you for the recognition there. When it comes to the garlic scapes, these are something that are in season right here, right now in Oregon. I actually ate some over the weekend. These are just delicious. They have so much flavor. I like to simply put them on the grill and get them nice and browned and soft, and then just chop them up and put them on stuff. So you can eat them in tacos or over a rice bowl. You're going to have this beautiful aromatic, mild garlicky flavor with some of the green flavor components that you get from, say, scallions or spring onions. Just a really, really delicious flavor. So I would grill them or roast them. You can make them into a puree and make a garlic scape type pesto or a sauce with walnuts or other sorts of nuts. Just be a really delicious base for something like that. So give it a try. Now is the season. Next question here from James. Please review one-pot steamed meals, including meals using pasta for one example and rice for another. So James, I think what you're asking here is meals where you have steamed components going over rice or going over pasta, this sort of a thing. I would say, when it comes to pasta, if you're doing like a one-pot steamed meal, it's really just about what are those vegetables that you want to include within that pasta. So it could be that you're doing a pasta that has broccoli and cauliflower and maybe bok choy and maybe some other vegetables. And I would say, great. Yeah, if you want to steam those together, maybe even some grated ginger on there as it steams to lessen the intensity of it. Those would be all great things that you could cook together. It all depends on the flavor profiles and what you're kind of going for. In terms of the pasta versus rice, you could probably do very similar things for both. It really just depends. It depends on what's seasonal, depends on what you're trying to look for. In addition to steaming, I might suggest, James, that one of the things that people like to do for flavor development is apply, instead of a one-pot meal for steaming, think about a one sheet pan meal for roasting, where you might put 3 or 4, 5 different kinds of vegetables onto 1 or 2 sheet pans and dry roast those and use those as a basis for a rice bowl or a pasta dish and things like this. And to me, those are really exciting because when you have the roasting opportunity, then again, getting back to what we said about flavor development and caramelization and concentrating flavors, that's when you can actually have some more potential interest in some of your foods other than just steaming. Steaming is a great technique, but it's not going to add additional flavor by way of the technique itself. Next question here is from Jay. I just completed the no oil sauteing activity. Should onions, garlic, and mushrooms always be cooked in the same manner? Onions first until translucent, then garlic for a few seconds, add mushrooms and a little water to deglaze. I would say in the no oil sauteing activity that we had, those mushrooms are very small mushrooms. I would say if you are using sliced button mushrooms or cremini mushrooms or larger mushrooms that would give off more water, my suggestion would actually be to get that pan very, very hot first, and to do the onions, and then to pull the onions out and to add the mushrooms, and then to add the onions back in and add the garlic. So in other words, you're just kind of phasing this so you don't have too many things in the pan at once, which could cause, in case of mushrooms, those mushrooms to just begin to steam and simmer and just exude a ton of liquid. So again, not the end of the world, but if you're looking for that coloration on the mushrooms, I would almost treat them separately if you were looking at mushrooms other than, very, very small type mushrooms. It just depends also how many mushrooms you're cooking. So I'm a mushroom guy. If I'm going to make something with mushrooms, I'm going to go pretty big on those mushrooms and make it the basis of the dish. I just want to make sure I get the coloration on there before too long. Separating them out might help in that activity. But really, it almost depends, Jay, on the recipe application. If there's just a few mushrooms and you don't need them to be browned, then sure, that sequence sounds perfectly fine. Next question here from Teresa. How does cooking time or temperature need to be adjusted with glass cookware in the oven? Oh, wow, Teresa, that is an excellent, excellent question. One that gets at kind of two things. One would be, the rate at which the pan heats up. And then by nature of the way that things are cooking in the oven, how much that pan is cooking that food after what period of time, let's say. So glass is going to take a lot longer to heat up than a metal pan, which means you might, in some cases, have a longer cooking time. But the caveat is that once glass gets hot, it's going to retain a lot more heat and actually cook at a faster rate than metal, because it's going to have retained more heat and be cooking a little bit differently just because of the nature of the heat retention and the amount of heat that it's keeping. So I would just say, in general, you're not going to see huge variations, but I have had cases cooking with glass where I find that I could use maybe a little bit less temperature in my oven, although I don't usually switch that out. But the timing might change a bit. It might just change the arc of the timing. In other words, it starts slower, but then it goes faster at the end, and also has more potential for carryover cooking, again, because that pan is going to stay hot and keep cooking that food even when it's out of the oven. It's not going to cool down as quickly as a metal pan. Next question here. On either yours or Chef Eric's recommendation, I purchased 2 Vollraff nonstick pans for preparing eggs. I love them. Does the nonstick surface of these pans have similar health risks as traditional Teflon? So Julie, they should not. The Vollraff pans typically have some kind of more advanced coating, a ceramic type coating that should be a lot more durable and not have the toxicity issues that people have associated with the old Teflon pans. Really, I think the Teflon pans of the 80s and the 90s were like a miracle when they came out, but very, very quickly people realized that they were prone to scratching, that high heat might even cause some more toxicity. They weren't really designed to be used to cook over high heat. So I think going back to the drawing board and a lot of the new technologies, they figured it out. They've done a much, much better job. Of course, anytime you have a coating on your pan, there's going to be some risk. So it's why I always say, great, use a nonstick, but also really, first and foremost, depend on your enameled cast iron, your stainless steel, your cast iron pans, which won't have any sort of a exterior coating that might break down over time. Next question here. Do you have any suggestions when it comes to cooking without onion and garlic, special diet related? Yeah, so if you can't eat onion and garlic, but you still want some of those flavors, I would say that, one thing that is used in Indian cooking that creates some of these flavors of onion and garlic is a product called asafoetida. And asafoetida is something that's very unique to Indian and Pakistani cooking. It has just a unique kind of resinous, sulfuric type flavor that is reminiscent of onions and garlic. Now, a little bit goes a very, very long way. So if you're new to it, it's something you want to just use in very, very small quantities. It's used a lot in Ayurvedic preparations, but really used in cases where individuals don't want to or can't have onion and garlic. Next question here from Brian. Ken, my friend continually pesters me to add different ingredients to new dishes that I try. My response is, let me master the technique first, then I try new things. What are your thoughts? So Brian, I think I appreciate both perspectives. If you have a friend that you are cooking with or cooking for, and he or she is asking you to do new things, like, that's awesome. Like, that is so cool that you have a friend or someone in your life that is interested in your food and wanting to try new things and has enough confidence in you that what you're going to make is going to taste good. So that's a great thing. Let's not forget how cool that is to start with. I would say that your response back in terms of wanting to be, just cognizant of the fact that you haven't mastered this dish or trying something new first is also great. I get it. You want to, figure out the way it was supposed to be designed, the way it was supposed to taste in the first place. And that's also great. I think for me, the magic of cooking is you're going to find the sweet spot between those two things very, very quickly. You're going to find the ways where, these dishes that are different, that are new, that are exciting, and the ones that you feel comfortable with are going to begin to come together. And you're going to see, oh, great, I can cook this thing, but add these new ingredients or this new flavor profile, and not even fundamentally change the technique of the dish, but really just change the way it tastes or change the way it feels in terms of service. So I would say, you know, both are correct. You don't ever want to stifle yourself. You want to be able to learn and grow and do new things, but there's something to be said about, great, I'm making a stir fry with these 4 things. Let's taste it. Let's see what they had in mind. Let's see what all the big fuss is about with these things going together, before you jump to conclusions or make assumptions that you may or may not like it the way it is. Of course, real life dictates some of this stuff too, where if you just don't have it on hand, or if something else is more preferential to you, then by all means. Next question here is from Paul. Can you provide additional information in regard to batch cooking? I understand it from the course, but haven't tried it yet. What's the best way to get started? So, gosh, Paul, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I would say that batch cooking is really one of the ways that I've been able to, on a regular basis for the last 20 years, still maintain a very diverse diet. I cook every day. I love cooking every day. It's not a burden for me, but I have kids and a family and busy. And I get it that you can't start every day at 5 o'clock by making a meal for 2 hours. So the great thing about batch cooking is it can considerably reduce the time that it takes you to cook while increasing the diversity of foods that you're eating. And that's the fun part of it. So I'll give you a sense of what I did over the weekend, Paul, just to give you an idea of how I batch cook over the weekend. But on Saturday, I batch cooked, and I made barley. So just regular barley. I just made it, and I kept about a quart of it cooked and put the rest of it into a container, and I'm going to freeze that barley. I made black beans, and I also made white navy beans. So I had basically 3 things that I cooked on the stovetop or in an Instapot that I now have between 2 and 4 quarts of each that I can put in my freezer or I can use this week. I also, on a sheet pan, roasted a bunch of vegetables. So I roasted some cauliflower, some leftover broccoli stems. I caramelized a ton of onions. I made some vinaigrette. So between those foods and between that and what I made last week, again, similarly roasted some things, made some grains, I now have a lot I can pull from. So when I'm looking at planning my menu for the week, it's not like, oh, I have black beans and I have to find a way to make a black bean dish every day. It's like, no, I have black beans, I have barley, I have white beans, I have my caramelized onions, I have my broccoli, I have my cauliflower. Those become building blocks for a soup, a bowl, a filling for a burrito, something I can just put cold on top of a salad even. So that's the idea of the batch cooking, is while something on your stove is simmering for 45 minutes, and that's active time that you're in the kitchen, you could have 2 things or 3 things simmering. And instead of simmering enough to make 1 meal, well, simmer enough to make 4 meals, because it's the same amount of time to simmer 4 times the grains as it is to simmer that 1 serving of grains. So that's kind of the premise. It's really about not doubling your efforts. If I know I have 90 minutes, I can get a lot done by kind of batching things, by just having multiple servings of that same product going at the same time. Of course, it's a little bit hectic. You're managing a few things at once, but ultimately it's still just 90 minutes is kind of what I'm targeting. Next question here from Charmine. She says, hi, I'm a dietitian and teach a series of plant-based cooking classes and use a lot of your content. Thank you so much. I would love your opinion. What do you think the most important topic to address in an intro to plant-based class? Gosh, that is a tough question. So much of it depends on your audience. If it's intro to people who are already bought into the idea or already have an acceptance or an understanding, that would be a little bit different than kind of trying to get people who are still skeptical or not fully embracing this quite yet. So part of this is how much work do you have to do to kind of bring them along with you? But I would say starting with the basics. You want to start with holding and handling a knife, ingredient selection. It's always good to start people with something that you know or you feel like are going to have a really high rate of success with in terms of them liking the food. And then keep it very, very approachable. It's got to be within a certain period of time. They can cook it on a certain budget. It's got to appeal to people who want big, interesting flavors. So I would just start with real food, making it taste good, where to find it, and the basics of food processing with a knife. Those are the very first things. Once you start chopping and once you start understanding flavor, then you can begin to really apply other techniques. That's when you can do moist and dry techniques and begin to build dishes. From individual dishes, you can build menus where you can have a salad and a soup, or maybe a dip or a spread, and then maybe more of an entree or a full bowl or something like that. But really, it's just about these building blocks. It also depends on, I guess, how many sessions do you have with them? Is it intro 1 of 3, or is it a 12-part series? So if you want to buzz us and ask us some more questions, we're happy to engage you on that. A lot of it really just depends. Next question here. We just noticed in the lesson gallery there are lessons on cooking eggs and various cuts of meat. We're new to this course and thought it was all about whole food plant-based, so we're confused. Just wanted clarity. So Tracy and Adrian, Ruby teaches everything around cooking, but if you're in a Whole Foods or Forks Over Knives course, that course itself will be 100% plant-based. So if you're interested in just seeing that, I would just go to your course page, click inside your course, and don't worry about the lessons and the galleries in there on Ruby. You can also, if you're not interested in seeing those things, you can actually set your preferences in Ruby to only view plant-based content. So that's just in your settings at Ruby. There's a plant-based only button. So if you're not interested in seeing that other content, by all means, click on that button. That would be useful. Next question here from Jill. What can you use as a substitute for Dijon mustard and vinaigrette in Forks Over Knives cooking? So Jill, I guess the question for me would be, is it that you don't like Dijon mustard, or there's something else about that is not working for you? So the first thing I would say is, if you don't like Dijon but would eat another mustard, is just use another mustard, right? And I would say, because Dijon has a fairly strong flavor profile when it comes to mustards, and you don't like that, I would just choose a more mild type mustard. If it's the mustard that you don't want altogether, you just want a different flavor, then we'd have to look at the recipe and say, well, gosh, the mustard in this recipe was really serving a component that was adding acid and maybe some bitterness to the dish, or some complexity to the dish. So what do we do to replace that to make it interesting without just taking it away? So it really just comes down to what's the objection around the Dijon. Some Dijon mustards are very, very salty, in which case, if you just want to use a mustard powder and then some vinegar to balance that, and either don't add any salt or just salt it to your taste. Next question here. In my country, we don't do a lot of oven cooking except when baking, apart from a Dutch oven. Can you please help with other oven-proof ware? I would say that the best thing to do is probably just get a sheet pan. So just what's called a standard half-size sheet pan, which is going to fit in a standard home kitchen, a home oven. A sheet pan is going to be a great thing. I would say other kinds of baking dishes. So like a 9-inch by 13-inch baking dish is going to be a very, very standard size baking dish, at least in the United States. So something similar to that. That would be, something where you're going to be using that for baking casseroles and baking other sorts of things. But a sheet pan is probably the #1 thing that I use in an oven for roasting vegetables on a sheet pan. So a lot of my oven work is on a sheet pan when it comes to vegetables. Where do you find fresh Kaffir lime leaves, and are there certain types of dishes they are frequently used in? So good question, Jennifer. You can find fresh Kaffir, or macaroot lime, as it's sometimes called, in most international or Asian style markets. A lot of natural food stores, even something like a Whole Foods market, might also carry it. Typically in the produce section, they're sometimes sold near the herbs or fresh herbs, or herbs that you can buy like in little containers, little plastic boxes. That's probably the best place to find them. In terms of dishes that they're used in, so they're very, very potent. They're also fibrous or tough, so they're sometimes used in dishes similarly to a bay leaf, where you're putting it in the dish, but then you're not eating it. In cases where you do eat it, it's sometimes sliced very, 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 very thinly, or even ground up in some cases. But it's a very strong flavor. It's very pungent. It's very aromatic. It has a kind of a interesting combination of citrusy, obviously, given that it's a lime, but also kind of interesting floral components as well. So I would say that in terms of dishes, it's used a lot in Thai cooking and Lao cooking, some Cambodian, some Southern Chinese foods or Vietnamese foods even. But primarily you see it in soups and stews. You see it as a way to add fragrance and unique character to those dishes by way of moist heat cooking. So it's simmering in a liquid and imparting its flavor by way of that contact. Next question here is, what are some of the ways besides cooking in which I can use my Ruby knowledge to generate income? Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think in terms of using what you learn with Ruby, there's lots of different things. Outside of just cooking, I think teaching people about lifestyle or nutrition or food more generally might be something you can do. But so many people, I would say, are just in need of guidance or direction. They want a helping hand. If you can use what you've learned through Ruby to help people achieve whatever it is their goals might be, that might be ultimately one of the very best things you could do for someone. I think obviously food and cooking is going to be sort of the framework that we're working in, but beyond that, I think probably a really good start. Just find ways that you can help people with that knowledge, even if it's just being supportive of people. Next question. Hi, Ken. I'm looking to register for the upcoming plant-based professional certification course at the end of the month and want to hear your opinion on its potential to boost overall creativity. Yeah, I would say that's probably the number one thing is our plant-based pro students come out incredibly creative. They have the ability to produce new things, to think on their own, to develop recipes. Yeah, it's a great way. It's a great thing to do in terms of becoming a lot more intuitive or confident in the kitchen, for sure. Question is, what part of the scapes can you eat? Well, you can eat the scape, not the very, very bottom, but the top, and then the very top of the scape where the bloom happens. That's the most delicious part as far as I'm concerned. So really, it's the length of the scape. It's all green with that top that you can use. Next question. I am oil-free. Would love an oil-free oil. I have heard chia seeds and water works. Do you have any suggestions on how to achieve, quote, an oil? So, if you look in some of our courses, we talk about making flax or chia gel. We don't really call them oil because you can't use them in traditional ways like oil in terms of cooking, although they do keep food moist in terms of baking. So I would say if you just want to grind some chia seeds or some flax seeds in some water, they will naturally thicken and create a gel that you could use for binding in baked goods and similar sorts of things. I would say on top of that, sometimes people use something like aquafaba as a coating if you're looking to add a browning component or an exterior browning component to certain foods. So I've taken aquafaba and actually lightly coated vegetables and then put them into a hot, dry oven and use that to kind of create that exterior crispiness and coating in terms of flavor. So yeah, certainly lots of different things. I would say the chia and the flax gel is going to be your first bet, depending on how concentrated or thick you want to make that. But otherwise, it deserves a lot of experimenting. So thanks, Naomi. Krista says, do you have any suggestions on how to get the most out of the course? For example, set regular attendance dates with myself. Yeah, Krista, I think that's good. Everyone has a different approach in terms of how they manage their own time. The biggest thing to do is always look at the number of tasks you have left and the amount of time you have. So if you just kind of look at that and say, great, I have this many tasks and this much time, you'll very quickly devise, well, how many tasks a day, how many tasks a week do I need to be in here to get my coursework done. Next question. I recently made Demi Gloss. Everything seemed to be going well, but it didn't gel up as I expected, which made freezing it difficult. What could be the causes? Did I not reduce it enough? Did I not refrigerate long enough? Any suggestions? Yeah, my guess, Larry, is it just didn't let it reduce long enough. It just didn't have enough internal gelatin to set up the way you expected it to. So that'd be my guess. You might just want to reduce it a little bit more. Certainly, once it gets cool, it should set up pretty firm for you. Next question from James. Please nail down the concept of braising, combination cooking, with a few forks over knives examples by naming the dry and moist cooking components. So I'd say, James, the number one thing that we think about with braising would be this combination cooking, as you referenced. You know, one of the things that I do for braising, forks over knives style, I would say I do like braised root vegetables or braised sweet potatoes is a very common thing. So I might start that by putting them into a very hot, dry oven, creating some exterior color, and then putting them in a pan with just a small amount of water, a small amount of liquid, flavorful liquid, and then covering them so that you're applying both a roasting as well as kind of a steaming / moist heat environment, just to cook them through to build some additional flavor in those dishes. Similarly, you can do the same thing with like fennel bulbs. I've done fennel where you can do kind of a pan, hot pan, dry pan, where you develop some color on the fennel, kind of a sear, and then you want to add a little bit of liquid, cover the pan, put in the oven, finish it that way. So those are techniques where you're doing the dry heat first. There's also techniques where you can take it and do it the opposite. And I'll take sometimes you know, onions and garlic and vegetables, and I'll start in a lower oven, really soft, just getting it kind of, you know, softened up essentially, and then pulling the lid off and putting it under a broiler and getting a lot of coloration and using that to puree to make a sauce. And that's a combination technique where you're essentially kind of steaming or sweating / steaming and then broiling. And you're applying heat, you know, radiant heat from above to create coloration, you know, bubbling bits and brown things, which again, I'll use probably in a sauce or something where I'm going to puree that just to make it consistently flavored throughout. There's just, you know, I would say lots of different things you can do for braising. I like to also braise tempeh, which is really, really delicious, where I might simmer it first or even do kind of a hard poach first in a flavorful liquid. And then after that, dry it off and apply my browning to kind of crisp it up or create some coloration on it. Next question here. What is the best way to use Rouxbe for my high school students that are on different grade levels? Oh, gosh. Well, there's a few different tools that we have. I'm not sure if you're currently set up in our system. If you are, we'd certainly love to help you kind of figure this out. But essentially, in your administrative area for your high school, you'll have the ability to build essentially different classes, and those classes can span different grade levels. So if you have a class that is a 9th grade or 11th grade class, you can actually break them up or divide them up like that with the administrative side of our back end, which we've set up for teachers. So hopefully that helps you. Next question from Irene. She says, the book doesn't ship to my location. Is there a digital resource available? I couldn't find it. Gosh, Irene, I don't know exactly what you're referring to in terms of the book. If it's the Forks Over Knives book, you might contact Forks Over Knives or a publisher to see about having that shipped to you. Otherwise, the book is not necessary for the course. Again, if you want to reach out to us with more clarification, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking or which book you're referring to. But there's no additional digital resource required for the course, if that's what you're asking. Julie says, chefs are calling for baking soda to be kind in the soaking process and the cooking process. Baking soda definitely softens the beans, but do you recommend incorporating the leftover liquid with baking soda from the boiling process into the dish? So Julie, great point. I didn't reference the baking soda in terms of the softening or soaking of the beans earlier. I should have. Baking soda basically creates more of a neutral cooking liquid for beans. Beans, if they are in a acidic environment, and vegetables are naturally acidic because of how they grow and because of the vegetable matter. A little tiny bit of baking soda, and by little tiny bit I mean like a 1/16 of a teaspoon, very, very small amount, a small pinch, will neutralize the acid and help maintain a closer to 7 pH. Water that's too acidic won't allow the beans to fully soften and swell, but water that's not acidic enough will cause those beans to break down, become very soft, and even have a slimy texture to them. So if you overuse baking soda, one of the things that you'll notice is the mouthfeel of the bean itself can feel a little bit slimy or slick, and that's how you know for sure, outside of the baking soda flavor, that you've gone too far. So it's always amazing to me, especially because your liquid is hot, that baking soda is going to activate even more strongly as a base, as an alkaline substance. So just a very, very small amount will go a long way. And I use baking soda primarily when I'm making garbanzo beans, when my end goal is extracting that exterior skin of the garbanzo when I'm making hummus and things. It makes you much, much smoother, more delicious hummus if you can take those skins off. Jerry asks, is there much overlap between the Forks Over Knives class and the professional certification plant-based course? Is it also whole foods? So the plant-based professional certification course, Jerry, is not a whole food plant-based course. It does include refined food products and oils, but it is a plant-based course. So if you just go to the website, Jerry, and have a look, you can actually see the syllabus for the course, and you can see exactly all the different content it covers. There is some overlap in terms of basic skills and product identification and some basic nutrition, but it also has a huge, huge world of additional content that is not available in the regular shorter courses. Okay. Next question here. This is from Richard. I am brand new to this website. Can you comment on the value of your 6-month cooking series, especially for an older retired person not interested in pursuing a culinary career? I am an experienced cook, entertain regularly, and love ATK. I would say that, for you, Richard, if you're retired and you just want to learn to cook, it'd be a great course for you. This is a 6-month deep dive where you could really dig into this and learn a ton. We've had a lot of people take the course like you who don't want to use it for a professional career, but really see it as a much, much deeper dive or a deeper way to have their own professional or personal, advancement. So I would just encourage you to dive right in. Next question here says, Ken, I'm in the middle of reconstructing the look of our pantry. When is this project to be into you? Actually, where should I be now in my study to work, and when does the course end? So Keith, sounds like you have some questions that are more individual. If you could reach out to us at studentservices@rouxbe.com, we can certainly help you. If you go to your dashboard, you'll see how many days you have left on your course and exactly where you are in the course. Hopefully that helps you. We like you to follow the sequence of the course. So when you get to the task about resetting your pantry, that would be the best time to do that activity, just so we can see what you've done and get a sense of your progress. Valentina says, hi, Ken, I'm not a big fan of celery. I like Chinese celery in salads and noodle dishes, but I don't really like the taste of regular celery. Could you recommend some ways to incorporate it into my diet? If you're not a fan, that's okay. There's lots of other vegetables to eat. I would say one of the things to do with celery is make sure you balance it with other ingredients. I happen to like celery completely on its own as a separate flavor, but some people find it to be not very interesting, so you might want to balance it with other flavors. Certainly the classic mirepoix, celery, onion, carrot, that's just a beautiful combination. To me, that just tastes like the base of so many amazing dishes. So that might be a starting point, Valentina. Just use that regular celery in your mirepoix for basic stocks and the bases of sauces and things. Next question from Naomi. Do you know of any healthy pots or pans that you recommend? I would say the number one healthiest pans are going to be anything uncoated, like a stainless steel pan. There's lots of brands. Enameled cast iron is also going to be a good option. Other than that, if you're looking for something with a non-stick surface, there's certainly lots of pans out there, green pans or ceramic coated pans and things like that that might be a good option for you. Next question here from Carmen. Hi, I'd like to read about what makes a recipe work, the key component. And from there, I'd like to learn more about playing with the ratios. Do you have any reading suggestions? Oh gosh, I think that there's a few great books out there. One is called The Flavor Bible, another book called The Vegetarian Flavor Bible, both written by the same couple, Karen Page and Andrew Dornberg. So the Flavor Bible or the Vegetarian Flavor Bible are great from a flavor components perspective. I think that's going to be really good. There's also a book written by Michael Rollman called Ratio, speaking of the term ratio, which talks a lot about kind of standard ratios in cooking. A lot of it has to do with chemistry and baking and combination of cooking in that sense. But certainly when you think about flavor and building flavor, that might be an interesting book for you to look at. Ryan asks, hey, Ken, does the Forks Over Knives course cover any type of plating techniques? Ryan, it doesn't. It talks about plating in the context of particular dishes, but that particular course does not have a standalone plating component. Great question. Thank you. Brian says, Ken, enjoying the course. Could you tell me a little bit more about using stainless steel frying pans and stop food sticking to them? Thanks a lot. So, the main thing within Forks Over Knives with no oil cooking and the stainless steel pan is this technique that we call the dry saute, the no oil saute. And the big thing there is really making sure that, number one, your pan is nice and hot to start with, applying what we call the water test, which is in the course. It's showing how to heat the pan properly. That's going to be a really important first step in using your stainless steel pan, making sure it's hot. The other thing is the sequencing, adding your ingredients, and then knowing that you have to add, in some cases when things begin to stick or develop too much color, that you're adding a very small amount of flavorful liquid. By small amount, I mean you want to use like a teaspoon or a small spoon to add that liquid. You don't want to pour it in and go, ooh, well, gosh, I added 6 ounces. You want to add like a ½ ounce or less so that it immediately steams and flashes the pan with a lot of steam and releases the pan and all those little things that might be stuck to the bottom. So it's a matter of constantly kind of hitting the pan, small amounts of liquid or flavorful stock, so it releases, but you're not creating a pool of liquid in the bottom of your pan. Once you do that, then you're no longer able to affect the coloration of the food in your pan. At that point, you're just simmering. So the balance is keeping a dry pan, but also releasing it with that flash of liquid. Next question. Oh, office hours are so helpful. We'll surely try and make most of them. Well, thank you. It's really great to have you joining us. And of course, if you can't make office hours, we're still available to answer your questions. We have a team who's always looking to help no matter what here. So thank you. I'm highly allergic to mushrooms and other sorts of funguses. Is there a substitute for them? I would say no. If you're allergic, I would just say find some other things to eat. I'm sorry. they're delicious, but if they're not going to work for you, I don't want to suggest anything that might get you sick. Next question here. What part of the green bean are you supposed to cut? Typically people just pull off the end that's connecting to the plant, and that's it. Other than that, you can cut the green bean however you like. And if it's really tender, you don't even have to cut off that part. So I would just say eat the whole bean if you can. Mel Beth says, how do I cook with whiskey? I tried sauteing mushrooms with the whiskey, but it didn't take any of the flavor of the whiskey. What did I do wrong? Generally, I would say that you're not going to get, really awesome results cooking in that way. Whiskey might be good in some sauces or some reductions and things like that, but typically I wouldn't use whiskey to deglaze something like mushrooms. It's just not going to give a lot of flavor or maybe even a desirable flavor in those sorts of contexts. Next question here. When I signed up for the 90-day Plant Strong certification class starting August 11th, when I sign into my dashboard, I see Start Course button. Do I start anytime and have 90 days from the start, or wait until July or August 11th, 2020. So, if you bought the class, I believe, again, you might want to contact our student service, but I believe they actually open it early for you. So Randall, if you want to go ahead and just contact our student services team, ask the same question you just asked me. They'll get back to you and let you know what you can do. I believe if you are able to get to the dashboard and hit the start button, that you can just start the course. So good luck with that. I have steel 6 and 4 quart narrower pans, bottoms of my pressure cooker, a wider non-stick 6 quart deeper pan, and a 7 quart oval enameled cast iron Dutch oven. Which of these would you recommend for batch onion caramelizing like you yourself do? I would do probably your wider non-stick 6 quart deeper pan or your 7 quart oval Dutch oven. Those are both going to be awesome. Because of the volume of onions you have to start with, you want something that's big, that's going to take those 5 or 10 or 15 onions that you're going to put in there. And then as it cooks down considerably. So it starts off with a huge volume, and then as you begin to caramelize and break them down, you're going to go down in volume by about 60 or 70% pretty easily. Next question here. Hi, Ken. What are the main differences between cooking for a few people, like a family, and say 20 people? I would say organization and timing are going to be the big things. Also having a menu that reflects enough diversity so that you can do things, say 2 or 3 days out. You can do things the day before, do things the day of. When it comes to cooking for that many people, the planning, the coordination, the diversity of the menu is going to be probably the main difference. It's not considerably different. It's just really a matter of the timing, coordination, making sure that when 20 people are hungry, that you've got an ability to get food onto a plate or into a service area and to keep those guests happy. Question here, what are some ways to cook pink oyster mushrooms? Gosh, I would, you can dry saute them or grill them or pickle them. Those would be great as a filling with a wild rice dish. There's just tons and tons of ways. I would just say enjoy them. You can make a great plant-based mushroom soup with that by using a little bit of a cashew cream base and some delicious mushroom stock. Lots and lots of things you can do with those. Next question here. Looks like our last question, actually. Can almond milk kefir be used in place of probiotic powder in the cashew cream cheese recipe? And if so, how would that substitution be measured? Also, what can be substituted for beer in the Gouda cheese sauce recipe? I would say the almond kefir may work in the cashew cream. Give it a try. I've never actually tried to inoculate the cashew cream with a kefir strain. So give it a try. Otherwise, I think just a regular probiotic or even just natural wild yeast and natural lactofermentation would also work in that case, depending on where you live and how long you're letting it stay out. So I would try it and let us know what you find. I'd be really, really curious, actually. And if you don't want to use the beer in the Gouda cheese sauce recipe, I would just omit that. What you might want to do is just substitute a little bit of flavorful stock just to add that extra flavor instead of just plain water. But you can just omit that and use some other flavorful liquid Vanessa. Hopefully that helps. That is awesome. Looks like that's all the questions we have for today. If I didn't get to your question or wasn't able to fully answer your question, of course, please do reach out to us directly. We're always happy to help you. Let us know if there's anything also that we didn't get to cover today, things that might be on your mind that were off of today's topic. So reach out to us. We're always happy to help. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you in class, and take care. Happy cooking.